There was a time when Mitsubishi did not need to explain itself. The name carried a certain confidence, the kind that comes from winning in places where metal is tested by mud, rain, gravel, and doubt. In the forests and mountain roads of rally racing, the Lancer Evolution was not just another performance sedan. It was a statement. Small, sharp, impatient, and brutally effective, it arrived with the attitude of a machine that had nothing to prove, even though it was always proving something. For enthusiasts, it became more than a car. It became a promise that a practical four-door could still have a wild heart. You could feel that promise in the era when Mitsubishi was seen as a serious force. The company had identity, direction, and a place in the conversation every time the subject turned to speed. The EVO stood shoulder to shoulder with its rivals, especially Subaru, and that rivalry gave the whole scene a pulse. One side sharpened its machine, the other answered back. Fans took sides, magazines fueled the debate, and young drivers stared at those cars like they were looking at the future. For a long stretch, Mitsubishi was not simply participating in automotive culture. It was helping define it. But every legend has a shadow behind it, and that shadow grows when the world changes faster than the brand can follow. While the EVO was earning admiration, Mitsubishi was facing quieter, harsher realities. Global finances tightened. Internal decisions became harder. The market began rewarding different things: efficiency, comfort, SUVs, and eventually the promise of electrification. The company that once built its image on grit and competition was being pulled toward survival, toward numbers that did not care about memories or fan loyalty. And that is where the story becomes painful. Because killing a car like the Lancer Evolution was never just about ending a model. It was about choosing between passion and practicality, between the identity that made people believe in the brand and the strategy that might keep the doors open. So how does a company justify walking away from the very machine that made so many people love it in the first place? And what does that decision reveal about Mitsubishi itself, and about any brand forced to sacrifice emotion for the future? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning of the rise, before the farewell ever became inevitable. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Mitsubishi's image was almost split in two. On one side, there was the ordinary company selling practical sedans, family cars, and compact models to keep the lights on. On the other, there was the Lancer Evolution, the machine that carried the company's reputation far beyond showroom floors. The Evo was not built to be polite. It was built to win. Every generation felt like a direct answer to the question, how fast can a four-door car become when engineers are allowed to dream? For enthusiasts, that answer was unforgettable. Turbocharged power, all-wheel drive, razor-sharp handling, and the kind of rally-bred aggression that made every red light feel like a starting line. In its best years, the Evo wasn't just competing with Subaru's WRX STI. It was part of a larger war of identity, a battle for the soul of Japanese performance cars. And Mitsubishi, for a while, stood proudly at the center of it. You could walk into a dealership and feel that history in the air. Not every brand has a halo car that makes people speak in reverent tones, but the Evolution did exactly that. Still, beneath the excitement, the company was changing. The global market was becoming less forgiving, and Mitsubishi was carrying heavy wounds from financial mistakes, internal restructuring, and shrinking resources. A sports sedan that demanded costly engineering, low-volume production, and constant performance development became harder to justify in boardrooms where every yen had to answer to survival. The Evo may have been a jewel, but jewels do not pay debts by themselves. And this is where the story becomes painful, because the people inside Mitsubishi were not cartoon villains in gray suits. They were managers looking at spreadsheets, asking difficult questions in quiet conference rooms. How do you protect the company? How do you focus on vehicles that sell in larger numbers? How do you keep a brand alive when the market is moving away from the very kind of car that made you famous? That tension created a before and after. Before, Mitsubishi could still speak the language of rally stages and performance pride. After, it had to speak the language of efficiency, crossovers, and electrification. The Evo belonged to the first world. Corporate reality belonged to the second. And once those worlds stopped agreeing, the legend was placed on a shelf that it would never truly return from. It is the kind of decision that makes fans angry, then silent, then thoughtful. Because deep down, many people have seen the same thing in their own lives. Something beloved, something meaningful sacrificed because the numbers no longer allow romance. And that is where Mitsubishi's story becomes more than a car story. It becomes a lesson. But what exactly pushed the company to that breaking point? And why did the EVO become the symbol of a struggle Mitsubishi could no longer afford to fight? By the time the last Lancer Evolution reached the end of its road, Mitsubishi was no longer the company many fans remembered from the glory days. In the past, the EVO had been the sharp edge of the brand, the machine that turned a practical family sedan into something almost heroic. It was engineered with purpose, tuned with obsession, and celebrated because it represented a simple kind of truth. Mitsubishi could still build something that made the heart beat faster. But in the new reality, that kind of passion was becoming harder and harder to justify inside a boardroom. The problem was not that the Evo had stopped mattering. In many ways, it mattered more than ever. Enthusiasts still spoke about it with the kind of respect usually reserved for legends. They remembered the turbo whistle, the brutal traction, the way it carved through corners like it was reading the road before anyone else could. But a sports sedan built for rally-bred emotion is not a machine that thrives in a company under financial strain. Every special part, every performance system, every badge that carried the Evo name came with costs that could no longer be ignored. Mitsubishi needed products that sold in larger numbers, with lower risk and with broader appeal. And that is where the heartbreak really begins. Because while fans were asking, why would they end this? The company was asking a very different question. What keeps us alive? That shift changed everything. SUVs offered room, efficiency, and profit. Electric vehicles promised a future the industry could not escape. The old identity, once built on rally victories and fearless engineering, was being replaced by survival logic. Not because passion had disappeared, but because survival had become more important than pride. You can almost imagine the silence in those final meetings. Someone must have looked at the numbers, then at the legacy, and understood the weight of the decision. Ending the Evo was not just about one car. It was about admitting that the world had changed, and that even legends are not immune to economics. And yet, that is what makes this story so human. Sometimes the things we love most are the first things we have to let go of when reality tightens its grip. If you've ever had to choose between what inspired you and what sustained you, you already understand the pain behind this decision. Was Mitsubishi wrong to let the Evo die? Or was it simply a company doing what companies sometimes must do? Because the answer may be waiting in what came next. In the end, Mitsubishi did not kill the Lancer Evolution because it forgot what the car meant. It killed it because the world around the car had changed, and the company had changed with it. That is the hard truth behind so many legends. They are not always defeated on the track. Sometimes they are quietly sidelined in meeting rooms, where spreadsheets speak louder than engines, and survival becomes more urgent than passion. For fans, the end of the EVO felt personal. It was more than a model leaving the lineup. It was the closing of a chapter that had defined Mitsubishi for years. The badge had stood for rally victories, late-night tuning garages, magazine posters on bedroom walls, and a kind of engineering honesty that enthusiasts could trust. When the final evolution disappeared, it left behind not just disappointment, but a strange silence. The brand that once challenged giants had chosen a safer road, one lined with crossovers, efficiency targets, and global restructuring. And yet, there is wisdom in that decision, painful as it is. A company cannot survive forever by feeding one legend while everything else weakens. Pride can build a reputation, but it cannot always balance a budget. Mitsubishi needed to protect its future, even if that meant surrendering a symbol of its past. That is a lesson many people understand in their own lives. Sometimes we are forced to let go of something brilliant because keeping it would endanger everything else we still hope to save. Still, understanding the reason does not erase the heartbreak. The EVO became legendary precisely because it felt alive, urgent, and uncompromising. It represented a time when a brand could take risks and win with character. To see that spirit fade into practicality was like watching a warrior hang up his helmet and walk into an office. Respect remains, but the story changes. Maybe that is why the Lancer Evolution still matters so much today. It reminds us that greatness is often fragile, and that businesses, like people, must sometimes choose between emotion and endurance. Mitsubishi chose endurance. The fans chose memory. And somewhere between those two choices lies the full truth of what happened. If this story made you think differently about the price of survival, take a moment to leave a like and tell us, was Mitsubishi right to protect its future, or did it lose a part of its soul forever? If stories like this speak to you, subscribe because there are many more legends and many more difficult choices waiting to be understood.